And we're live.
We are live. Let me wait till this starts streaming on YouTube so I can stop my browser from playing the audio. There we go. We're live. If anybody's waiting to watch us, now they can see us on time. 2 minutes late. 2 minutes late. 2 minutes is close enough to on time on Iron Sysadmin Standard Time.
Iron Sysadmin Standard Time.
Yeah. It's like daylight savings time, except without the stupid time shift. We're just late all the time. Yeah?
And that's about the size of it. And that's a very apt description. This could be applied to other things, yes.
All right, I'm going to get this show going, all right? Here we go.
Iron Sysadmin, ambitious but rubbish.
Rubbish? That's mean.
It's a Top Gear reference.
News, ops, and a little bit of paranoia. Welcome to the Iron Sysadmin podcast.
All right, folks. Welcome to tonight's episode of the Iron Sysadmin podcast. I'm your host, Nate, and I'm joined by two of our co-hosts, further proving that we cannot all be on the same show at the same time. Correct? I've got Charles with me. Say hi, Charles.
Hi, Charles.
And Jason, who's still muted.
Well, yeah, because, it's rude to unmute and make noise.
Yeah, you don't want to make noise over the intro music, right?
Yeah.
You have to forgive
Correct.
me, folks. I have a touch of a cold. So if my voice gives out or something, we'll just have to depend on these two these two fine gentlemen to to carry on the show without me.
Well, we can certainly flood the air with noise. I mean, that's no problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what we do, right?
Hmm.
Or at least flood the data with noise.
Wow. That was okay.
What?
I was trying to bring up the YouTube link in Twitter, which opened it up and played it, and then opened up another window with YouTube in it and played that. So you just echoed 3 times in a row. It was
crazy. Further filling the data with noise.
Yes.
That's a feature that was supposed to happen.
Just be happy that didn't feed back into the podcast, because then you would have heard like an infinite echo that went on forever. Right? That's how that works.
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. All right, so I guess we'll move straight on into the news then, huh? We got some interesting news from Wired that food giant McDonald's has recently purchased a big data firm. Let me find the name here. Dynamic Yield, which is apparently Indian-based from Tel Aviv. Is that India?
That's Israel.
Israel, I'm sorry. I knew that when I read it before. I got the I right.
Good job.
Not quite close enough.
Oh, I points for effort, I guess.
Yeah. I guess it's a foreign country. Starts with an I. Ireland.
Well, I guess there are worse countries starting with I you could have confused it with.
So, Dynamic Yield, according to Wired, is an AI platform which handles decision logic. Basically, like if you're shopping for something on an online website or an offline website, I suppose, that uses this software, the thing that suggests other products to you could be Dynamic Yield. It's one of those things. It's one of those packages. And apparently McDonald's has purchased them for, let's see, over 300 million. Is that what that said?
Yep.
That's what it says here. Over 300 million. So, I mean, why in the world would McDonald's want to buy an AI firm? Apparently, it's because they have this great idea that they could sell more products if it dynamically and intelligently suggests products to you. The news that I'm reading here from Wired and from a couple other articles that I read regarding the subject is that the first place they intend to leverage this is on something like the McDonald's drive-thru. So you've all been through a McDonald's drive-thru, I assume, or at least any fast food drive-thru. You pull up, and there's advertisements there for things that the place sells. And generally, these are very static, except for maybe they change from breakfast to lunch or whatever. What they're going to do with this first, according to the report, is they're going to make those signs dynamic. So if it's like 98 degrees outside, it'll recommend ice cream. If there's like an event in town, it'll recommend things that might be related to the event, I suppose. That's one of the examples they use in the article, though I can't imagine how McDonald's might have themed stuff like that. But like their Shamrock Shakes, for example, for St. Patrick's Day, I'd imagine that's the sort of thing where it's like, oh, it's St. Patrick's Day, start showing the Shamrock Shakes, that kind of thing. So interesting stuff. I don't know. You guys have any comments on being dynamically offered fast food?
So let me see if I understand this correctly. They spent $300+ million on a company who wrote a machine learning algorithm to ask you if you would like fries with that.
Seems that way.
Oh. I have to go write some Python. I'll be right back.
Yeah, I don't fully understand why they had to buy Dynamic Yield to do this. Like the company.
It may just be a good investment.
Yeah,
maybe,
that's possible. Maybe. And I'm betting that they are it's going to go way beyond just the drive-through and the doing things inside. They'll tie it to your credit card, and then they will build a big profile about how much fat you eat and what kind of food you like, and they will sell that to the highest bidder.
Why couldn't they do that as a Dynamic Yield customer is what I'm curious about.
They may have been able to, but licensing agreements.
Yeah, I guess this could be like
get a little weird there.
This could be cheaper in the long run, I suppose.
Yeah,
I could pay Uber to drive me to work every day, or I could buy a car. Buying the car is probably a better bet in the long run because it'll cost me less. Because all I'm doing is putting fuel and maintenance into my vehicle instead of paying Uber to drive me an hour each way.
But would you buy a car?
Have to drive the car.
But would you buy a car from Uber?
No.
That's a good question.
I definitely would not.
Probably not. But, I mean, that's sort of different. Uber's not a car manufacturer. Dynamic Yield is a software vendor, right? Or a software creator, right?
Yeah, and it could just be they wanted to ensure that there was a company that was tame in certain ways that would always provide them this capability.
Yeah, it could be, what if we start depending on Dynamic Yield and then Dynamic Yield goes belly up, right? Or we don't get enough say in how they're making their algorithms work and we want more say. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, I'm betting. So there's a little bit of talk in here about this moving into the kitchen as well. I wonder if this is going to start identifying how, start telling the humans what to cook when, and identify what needs to be rotated out, and make sure you have the right pace.
It's almost breakfast rush. Start cooking the eggs. But I mean, do you really need to be told that?
Well, I can offer a little bit of insight. I mean, it's a bit dated. But I did spend a couple of summers in a McDonald's kitchen, and having predictive metrics on meat preparation would actually be pretty cool, because you run out of a certain kind of thing, or you're running out of a certain kind of thing, you make more. But the amount you make is not really based. You make another batch, but I can tell you that a lot of food got thrown out because it was in the warmer. We hit the expiration point, and you joke about this, but managers would be checking pretty often that, all right, it's hit the limit, it's got to go. So if we had a better sense of, all right, we are likely to sell this much more meat over this range of time, then you can be better prepared to meet, no pun intended, certain rushes. Now, obviously, there's the doomsday scenario where a bus pulls up that you weren't expecting, but
McDonald's doomsday.
But if
they have to sell a lot of burgers.
If the AI is monitoring the traffic and sees using the traffic cams, it can identify the bus and determine what path it's going to take. So the couple of kitchens that I worked in, I worked at McDonald's and Burger King when I was younger. There were probably one or two people that were relatively capable of laying out what type of like how much food to be producing at any given time based on how long they've been there. But generally speaking, unless somebody was in charge of doing that, it was hit or miss. You were either throwing food away or customers are getting pissed because you didn't have the food ready.
So the thing like the bus scenario though, that sounds like it'd be hard to predict unless you're right. It's actually monitoring traffic, right?
But maybe it is predictable. That's the thing. I mean, shifts were pretty. I doubt this has changed. Everybody's schedule is so variable, and everybody's part time. So it's not like there's institutional knowledge about. Thursday afternoons tend to be this way, but the algorithm knows. I think what McDonald's may be hoping that there's going to be certain patterns that arise in the data, just things that weren't really visible to the people on the ground, or not. Maybe it turns out it's totally random.
Yeah, I guess some sort of overarching AI that monitors all of this stuff certainly could start to match. And Slack is doing that thing to me again, just like it did on the last show, where it just like reloads in the middle of the show and it makes things choppy.
Hey, I was just going to mention that you were a little choppy there.
Yeah, you broke up. Nothing squirrel on the roof again.
Must be a squirrel. No, it's tree branch. Totally tree branch. So anyway, so McDonald's will start offering AI with your fries. So that's both scary and great. All right, then. Moving on to a CNET article that will undoubtedly try to play you a video, so be careful. All right, so this is mainly just Apple announced some stuff this week, and I thought we'd talk briefly about the stuff Apple announced, mainly because Apple TV Plus sounds kind of interesting if I understand it correctly. So, the things that they've announced are a TV service called Apple TV Plus, which is like the worst named service ever, in my opinion. Just based on their history of Apple TV devices, which this is not. This is a service. Weird.
I'm sure if we put our heads together, we can find other services that are ineptly named as well.
Quicksker.
There you go. Done.
We're done. We got it. Also, a subscription gaming service, which I guess is basically like the Apple App Store games all roped into one, where you pay a subscription instead of paying per game. Do I have this right?
Yeah. So I actually watched the live stream, and the rationale for this one is that so free games in the App Store, and any App Store, doesn't matter what platform you're on, tend to do relatively well, because they're free and people jump all over them. And they've noticed that the paid apps, despite some of them being absolutely incredible, don't do quite as well as a free game. And what they're trying to do is say, if we set up a subscription to this thing called Apple Arcade, and we start paying the various developers that join the Apple Arcade program, we can take that money and split it across the developers, and I'm sure, generous chunk for themselves.
Sure.
And give people the ability to play all of those different games, and sort of, bring that up so that they have as much visibility as the free games are getting these days.
Well, I guarantee it would be more like you get paid when people play your game. No,
that's possible. I don't know.
I mean, it couldn't be.
Those details are still a little hidden.
I can't imagine just like, I have a game, I get it on the Apple App Store, I start getting money because I'm part of this gaming service.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Like, people have to actually play the game, otherwise I'm not.
Yeah, but then the question is, is it per play? Is it, like, there's a lot of unanswered questions.
Right.
And given that this isn't supposed to launch until the fall, I believe.
Oh, sure. They may not have answers yet.
Yeah. I'm sure they have something internally, but they're just not releasing yet.
Right. The other thing is Apple News Plus, which didn't sound all that interesting to me, except it's another news service.
Yeah, it's already.
So
I saw an interesting note today and I had actually forgotten about this. I sort of, when I was watching the live stream, it sort of jumped into my mind. So do you remember Newsstand from years ago? Apple came out with Newsstand, which was all the magazines.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
you got the subscriptions through this app called Newsstand.
you have to
what
remember,
they've
I'm only recently an Apple user. I was always an Android user until now, so this is all foreign to me.
so back in the day, they had Newsstand,
Yeah.
which was basically mostly magazines. I think there were newspapers on there too. And if you look at what they've done with news, they've taken Newsstand and stuck it in news. It's identical. I mean,
Interesting.
Slightly different interface, but it's exactly the same product.
Cool. That's a great way to do things. And then, of course, an Apple credit card, because, you know, why not? I'm actually surprised it took Apple this long to have their own line of credit. It seems like every big hardware manufacturer has something that lets you charge, you know, to buy their hardware, because it enables you to buy their hardware. Like Dell has something. Dell has got their own friggin' bank. It sounds like Apple is working with MasterCard. And what was the bank they named?
It's Goldman Sachs.
Goldman Sachs.
Yeah. So well, titanium card, which is cool. But the thing that I like about the credit card piece is just sort of the interface that they have on giving you the ability to do all the calculations yourself and figure out minimum what you want to pay versus what it's going to cost over time. That's actually really nice.
So I heard rumblings somewhere that this credit service was going to be somehow privacy aware. Did you hear that as well, or am I making stuff up?
So the privacy argument is that Apple themselves will never actually get a copy of your purchase history. It's all machine learning and stuff that's doing all the fancy stuff on it. The only people, or the only company that's going to have that purchase history is Goldman Sachs, and they've promised not to sell it.
Totally.
Oh yeah, totally trust Goldman.
Totally trustworthy.
So the card has no fees at all, none apparently. So I'm not sure how that works when you don't pay it.
There's got to be an interest fee.
There's interest. That's not considered a fee. That's interest. So they don't know what the interest. They haven't announced what the interest rate is. They're saying it's low.
That'll probably depend on your credit score.
It's probably going to depend on credit score,
how that goes.
And it'll probably be, if they want to say lowest in the industry, they'll probably do like 1 or 2% lower than most of the other cards.
So, are you saying no fees, even including penalties?
No penalty fees at all. Yeah.
So, like, if I don't pay my credit card bill, there's no fee.
There's no late fee.
If I go over the limit, there's no fee. Maybe there's no limit. It's Apple. Buy all the stuff.
I think they're just gonna. I think once you hit the limit, you just hit the limit.
Yeah. Well, right, but I mean,
but if it goes over the limit, yes.
Every credit card stops you when you hit your limit. But if you hit your limit and leave it there, and you get an interest fee, and you go over the limit, then they're like, "Oh, good, we can charge you more money, so you're more over the limit."
Right. So they claim no fees. It remains to be seen what they're going to do about those wonderful people that don't pay their credit cards.
I don't know if you can tell, but I just love credit cards.
Yeah. So the key with this one appears to be, so you can get the titanium card itself, but that's kind of a secondary thing. That's if you can't use Apple Pay anywhere else, then you have the titanium card to sort of fall back on.
Yeah.
Everything about the card requires you to have an Apple device, and that's sort of the lock-in. And they may move to other platforms eventually, but they may not.
Apple does a great job of not being cross-platform. I'll say that as an Android user coming to Apple, they do a great job of, like, this is the Apple ecosystem. You have to have Apple hardware to use it, with some exceptions. There's a handful of exceptions. Google was the opposite. Like, basically, when I got my iPhone, I had all this stuff in Google's ecosystem. I just installed all the Google apps, and I could still use my stuff, right? So, like, if I ever switch back, I'd be afraid to see what happens to anything that I depend on Apple for. It'll just be useless to me, I think. Which kind of scary, but whatever. So I saved the best for last, and that's this Apple TV Plus, and that's because the way I'm reading this article, and maybe you can correct me since you saw the event, is this a a la carte TV service?
Yes, this is an a la carte TV service. However,
The thing
I don't.
asking for since we started cutting the cord.
Yeah, it remains to be seen. So we say a la carte. I don't know channel wise how this is going to work. It's definitely interesting. It sounds like they have a lot of interesting exclusives that are coming out, but there's a lot of information that's not out there yet. And to your previous point about Apple being Apple only, this is where they're actually making a break from that, because they're releasing the Apple TV app, if I understand it, for a bunch of other smart TV devices, Samsung, LG, Sony.
Smart TVs, Roku, and Amazon Fire TV.
Yep. And then Roku and the Fire TV are getting the app as well.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, if you're going to have a successful television service, you're going to have to spread beyond. Apple does seem to get that. If you're going to offer a service like iTunes, for example, iTunes is cross-platform because they sell stuff through iTunes, right? So if they're going to sell stuff, they have to be broad enough that anybody can buy stuff. And that seems to be where they draw that line. If it's like, I want to be able to store my pictures on iCloud, it's okay, you need an Apple device. So where Google is the opposite. Google's just like, okay, if you want to pay us $2 a month for your 100 gig of storage, you can store all the pictures you want on here. I don't care if you're doing it with a tin can and a string.
Yeah, so I think you're going to see this starting to change a little bit because so Google is primarily a services company. Google doesn't make money on hardware.
Oh yeah. Android has always been a gateway to get people into the Google ecosystem, and then the Google ecosystem is the way they make money.
Right. So their entire aim in life is to spread as far and wide as they can and work on everything. Yeah. Because that means that you get on their platform.
Right.
And as we all know, even when it's free, you're paying. So Apple, on the other hand, has been primarily hardware.
You're paying with people collecting data on you.
Right. So Apple is primarily hardware. So they're looking for
it's a different model.
People to stay in their ecosystem. Now with services, that changes a little bit because now they're going to want to spread those services wider. I think what you'll find is that the experience is always going to be top notch on an Apple device, whereas it may suffer a little on other devices. I mean, look at iTunes on Windows, for example. Like it's just horrible.
I mean, it's functional.
Right. It's functional. That's about it. I mean,
it's good enough.
When you're talking about something that software that you're going to be using all the time, it's functional is not really what you're looking for. You're looking for like, oh, I really enjoy using this.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, those are the cool new things coming from Apple. I'm really interested to see where TV Plus goes, because if it truly is, there was something in this Wired article, and I'm just sort of skimming through to see if I could find it, that made it sound like this was going to be roll your own channel package. And that is really interesting to me, because there's certain channels I would love to pay money to be able to watch. And currently with the way streaming services have evolved to basically emulate the cable model, well, I can't do what I was hoping to be able to do when I stopped subscribing to cable. And now, instead of subscribing to cable, I'm subscribing to, digital cable provider X. This is the best word I can come up with, like Sling, for example. Sling, you pay a flat price for a group of channels. Like 90% of them I might not want to watch, but I got to pay for them so I can get the 10% that I do. And that was the exact problem with cable, and that was one of the reasons why I cut the cord. Also because they're a bunch of money-grubbing bastards and overpriced services. But slowly but surely, streaming providers are doing the same thing. I mean, Netflix is an exception. Hulu's kind of an exception, except that they're rebroadcasting other people's content. But and
they have commercials, so they suck.
Right. So Sling and DirecTV Now and Fubo or Fubo, whatever it's called, they're all the same basic model as the cable TV providers were or are, where you pay X for cable package Y, and you pay Z for cable package A, and you get these subset of channels. And if you want some weird combination of the channels on both of those things, you got to pay for the higher package. There's no pick and choose what you want. Because
on the back end of those, they are cable. Or they're either cable or satellite.
Right. So, I mean, I don't know that Sling is. I don't know if Sling was ever based in a a physical space. It was always digital. Maybe I'm wrong, but Sling uses that model. I'm very disappointed in it. So anyway, I think we've talked enough about Apple. We can move on.
So Sling is owned by Dish, so
That explains it. You can't escape them.
nope.
You can't escape them.
Well, you can. You just cut the cord and don't have local TV channels.
That's what I do.
Which I've lived without for years.
Yeah.
The only thing I miss is football.
Right, which is why I have YouTube TV, because I get football.
But YouTube TV, isn't that the same boat?
It is.
Yeah,
but it's cheaper, and I can cast it, and I can watch it anywhere.
Right.
Almost anywhere.
Almost anywhere.
Occasionally you hit weird blackout rules, but
except on my old Roku. I have like the first Roku that I bought, I still have on a TV that I don't use often. And apparently it's old enough that there's certain apps that don't work now. YouTube TV is one of them.
That's a you problem.
I know.
Get a Chromecast.
Just saying. I actually have an old Chromecast too, which still works. Surprisingly, everything I've thrown at it still works.
Only if you're on the right network.
Only if you're on the right network.
Yes.
Oh, right. If you're not on a network that segregates your users from their devices, then yes.
What kind of monster would design a network like that?
What monster would do that?
Somebody who wants a secure network.
No such thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, let's move along. Fast Company reports. Well, it's really just sort of an editorial piece, I guess. That's what you call this, right?
Yeah, this is an editorial.
Yeah. So the title is "I'm 14 and I quit social media after discovering what was posted about me," which is a very vague title. Well, not vague, but it's very like leading, right? Basically,
clickbaity, maybe.
Yeah, right. This is a story or a editorial about a 13-year-old girl. I think they don't give her name, do they? I don't know.
No, she's under. Well, her name is there because she's the author, but
she wrote the whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought it was somebody that. I'm horrible at this, guys. I'm sorry. Israel.
You're not gonna live that one down. You're already getting picked on.
Yeah, I saw, man. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Anyway, I got so much going on at this end that you should be happy that I can actually speak coherently. Sometimes I can't.
Drink more beers, it'll make it better.
As witnessed at the beginning of this show. Okay, so anyway, this girl or young woman, 13 years old, her parents decided that's the cutoff age where their kids are allowed to start using social media. So she signs up for Facebook and Twitter. Why she chose those two, I don't know. I guess it's just like what other people were using in her household. And she finds that her older sister and her mother had already posted a bunch of stuff about her and her life, about her consent, which is not that unreasonable. To me, anyway, as a parent, right?
Yeah, unreasonable. It's not that uncommon. So
not that uncommon, right? Well, no, it's a thing that, from my perspective, didn't really enter my mind until I read this article, which is why I've taken this article and I've recommended it to a bunch of other parents that I know, because it may not have entered their mind either. Right. So even me as a technology person, it never really occurred to me that my daughters might not like the fact that I'm sharing information about them with friends and family. Right. Now, my social presence is locked down to the point where folks can't just sort of browse in and see pictures of my kids and whatnot. You have to have friended me or linked with me in some way on that particular social network. It's just the way I've always done it. So it's not like it's public information, but it is information that I've shared with a relatively large network of friends, quote unquote, on these various social networks. Not so much on Twitter, because Twitter's a lot more public and open. I don't really share a lot about my family and my kids on there. But Facebook, because I'm able to lock down my profile in the ways that I have, it never really crosses my mind that I shouldn't share a picture of my daughter doing something funny or whatever. But anyway, the point is that this girl signs up for Facebook or Twitter, notices all this stuff, and she's like appalled, and she has a conversation with her older sister and her mother, and they agree that they won't post any more pictures of her. Cool. And she goes on to talk about how she's actually, her school actually has this company come in, which I'm trying to find the name of. Should have wrote this down. They have this organization come in, and basically they're there to teach young people about the pitfall.
It's called Okay to Say.
Sorry, you broke up. What was that again?
It's called Okay to Say.
Okay to Say. That's it. I'm thinking to I'm like, I remember this was like a short form with a number in it, and I'm just skimming this thing to try to find it. Anyway, they come into schools and they try to teach kids about how to responsibly share on social media and about the sort of things that kids might not be thinking about, like the fact that this stuff is generally forever, and the fact that when you're 18 or out of college and you're looking for jobs, it's not impossible for an employer to go back and look at your social media history and see what you're all about. So sharing stuff that might be, you know, like how you got high last weekend might be detrimental to your job perspectives, right? So she took that and combined with her bad experience with, you know, the day she signed up, and she basically decided, I don't want any part of this. I think in her words in the article, it was that she decided she wasn't ready for this, and she actually closed her accounts out. Didn't delete them. She says that she made them dormant. So I don't know. I just thought this was an interesting read. I thought it was a interesting perspective from the new generation of kids that are coming into a world where social media is already rampant. I know you guys are probably in the same boat, but when I was this age, we had BBSs, or we had, you know, some minor version of what could be called a social network by today's standards, but it wasn't nearly as permanent as today's social networks are.
And your parents weren't on it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
my parents missed that entire boat. I mean, they will never have social media accounts. It's just passed them by.
Right. So, my dad was as into technology as I am. So he knew of BBSs and what they were and how to interact with them. He also knew that they could be dangerous places, especially for kids. So I learned all that early on before I was ever even online. I just had the benefit of that, you know, because my dad knew, right? And I intend to teach my kids the same stuff before they hit the internet. But yeah, there's certainly a lot of people our age that their parents are like, computers, I don't want to touch them, because they're newfangled weird things, right? They just didn't grow up with them. Whereas my kids will never know a world where there wasn't a computer not even a computer at hand, but a computer in your hand, in your pocket, with you everywhere you went, right? So, yeah, I just thought it was an interesting article. If you're a parent, I suggest you read this thing, or at least skim over it. Or at least listen to this show.
Yeah, we have a coworker who does occasionally talk about his kids and his social media accounts, but he uses pseudonyms for them.
Yeah.
Which, you know, is, I think, and generally, you know, I think sometimes tweets pictures, I think, but it seems like when he does, it's like with their knowledge and consent. So,
yeah,
you know, interesting way of handling it.
I have, out of habit, I call each of my kids by a nickname, and that's usually what I use when I post about them online. Friends and family know who I'm talking about, but I don't feel like that would be too difficult to tie together later. You know what I mean? Like, sure, some random stranger won't be able to go like, oh, that's his daughter's named X and that's his daughter named Y. But they'll be able to separate the posts. You know, this is about that child and this is about that child. And then all they have to do is do some very minor digging probably to figure out my kids' names. And they can match that up. You know, so that's nice, but it's not a protection. I don't feel like it is anyway. And the idea of my kids consenting to them having their pictures online, it just didn't occur to me, right? Because your kids are, because like, and this is going to sound weird, because you created them and you cared for them like a potted plant for so long, they almost feel like a thing that is yours. and to some extent within the boundaries of reason and morality, you can sort of do with them what you please. This is probably coming across really strange, but I hope you get what I'm saying, right? Like, it never occurred to me that posting a picture of my daughter doing something funny would be something that my daughter later might come back to me and say, "Why the hell did you post that? You didn't have my permission." But it makes sense now that I've read it. Is my point.
Yeah. So this is a definitely a 21st century conundrum.
Yeah,
and I've seen this come up on a number of different podcasts and news sites about this exact thing. So it's
when I was a kid, my mom took 1 billion pictures, but they were physical and they were in photo albums, right? So yeah, she can pull out the photo albums and look at all these funny, stupid things that I did as a kid, but they're not on the internet. They're not accessible to the world, right? And I think that's the big difference.
I just avoided putting anything about my kids out there.
But
that wasn't really because of their. I mean, it was their privacy more so in that I don't want creepers, as opposed to thinking about what they would say years later when they were old enough.
Right. It was about their privacy from a protective stance, not from a consent stance. Right.
Correct.
So, yeah, I guess, excuse me, part of me is like, consent to that level almost sounds like a whiny complaint, but part of me understands it, right? Part of me gets it. Like, parents have taken embarrassing pictures of their kids for as long as there have been cameras. You know what I mean? They just haven't shared them on the internet. So anyway, I think that's enough there. So the next two articles are basically follow-ons for each other about, well, I don't know. You want to go ahead and take this, Jason? I think you added these to the notes.
Yes. So Shadowhammer.
Shadowhammer. You have to say it like that.
No, I'm good.
Shadowhammer.
Thanks. I'll just point to you whenever I need to say it, and then you can do this. You can do the word. So apparently, for about half a year, Asus was pushing an update to all of the computers that got updates from Asus. That was malware. Brilliant.
This is like I was talking to Charles before you joined the show earlier when I was reading over this. This is like the holy grail for someone who wants to distribute malware.
Yeah. So it was a supply chain attack is what they're calling them.
Yeah.
And basically they took over Asus's update server and put their own software on there that needed to be pushed out. And Asus said, "Oh, look, new software to push out to everybody. Let me sign it and push it out, and it's authentic."
That was the awesome part, that they actually got it to sign it.
Yep. That's also an attack that you can do on blockchain stuff, by the way. The more interesting piece of this, so they know that this has happened. They've stopped it. The follow-on news article basically is a note that they released a fix to, I guess, remove the Shadowhammer backdoor. A little too late, I guess. Anyway, killing me. Anyway, the more interesting part of this entire thing is that they estimate that this made it onto somewhere north of, what was it, 500,000 machines? I don't remember where it is. Anyway, yeah, 500,000 Windows machines.
Kaspersky estimates about 500,000.
But
Windows
the
machine.
attackers only used about 600 of those systems. They were targeting them by MAC address. And there's a lot of chatter out there and sort of guesswork about why they're doing this. Obviously, if you know the MAC address of a computer, you probably know who owns that computer. Theoretically. And if you're able to get that in advance and target that particular MAC address, maybe that would give you a certain advantage in a for something specific. They haven't
Or
really released.
It could be that we're reading too far into that, and it's simply that they hadn't fully leveraged the foothold they had.
It's possible, but the malware was designed specifically to search for MAC addresses, certain MAC addresses. So,
actual individual MAC addresses, or just a hardware specific, like manufacturer prefix? Or
I
like that?
don't know how deep it goes.
You would think that manufacturer prefix would be related specifically to Asus.
Yeah. So
Because it
right,
is an
good
Asus
point.
update.
Yeah. So your first 6 is going to be just an Asus OUI.
I mean,
so the rest of it wasn't important.
If you're
But
talking about Ethernet Mac, though, it may not be Asus. It could be like Intel or whatever Ethernet board chipset you've got.
true, but it's going to be the MAC address on the system. So it's still going to be. It's not something that, it's not something that the typical person changes. So Space Rogue, so there's a lot of different people talking about this, and Space Rogue, who was one of the guys who testified in front of Congress years and years and years ago. He was part of the Loft group. Anyway, his comment was basically that it's not actually that hard to get this information, because every or most, and you guys are familiar with this because you've used Dell as a for the college. They'll give you a manifest of the MAC addresses in advance of what systems are coming, so that you can put them into, here's a CSV file of all the MAC addresses, so that you can then update your management systems, and when they come online, it just happens. It just works.
Yeah.
So if the attackers were able to get deep enough into Asus to infect their update system, I don't think it's that far-fetched for them to have gotten to the point where they can see the list of MAC addresses and who they went to.
Could be.
And they were clearly after something specific.
Right.
They just, to my knowledge, they haven't released any information about who owned owned those particular systems. So it's not.
And they may not.
Engadget says it's not clear why they focus on that subset of machines, but I'm sure Engadget has no idea who owns them.
Right. So, well, it's not clear is a very safe way of saying this seems suspicious, but we can't speculate until we have more information.
Right. So it could be that these are machines that were distributed to government employees, or to specific, say
banks
different industries, banks, or right. So anyway, but it's fixed now. Asus totally fixed it, and everything's right with the world again, and it's all rainbows and ponies.
Everything is fine now. It's fixed. No damage. Only 600,000 users. Isn't that what it says? 600 users. Whatever.
Yeah, only 600 were targeted. Only 500,000 got it.
Yeah. Right.
And I'm sure they're all patched now.
In the grand scheme of things, 500,000 isn't that big of a number.
No, but
it's a lot.
I mean, depends who 500,000 it is.
Yeah, right. It depends on who that 500,000 is and who the 600 were.
And it depends on what they're doing with them. You've got 500,000 infected machines now. That's a fairly sizable botnet.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Is that all the news then?
That is.
Or did you want to thoroughly cover how they fixed it?
There's not a whole lot of information other than they put the update on their server and pushed it.
Cool. All right, then. Off we go. All right. The news is done. Now we can speak freely.
Is this where I complain about talking about all the Apple products? Oh, wait, are we still live? Crap.
No, we're totally live. Look, if you had some cool Android announcement, you certainly could have added it to the show notes.
I'm just glad when my phone turns on.
Quiet, you're in the minority now.
We cover plenty of Google and Android news. I still like the platform. I just was really frustrated with their devices and gave up, essentially. Gave in to the mass. So I don't know if we got anything serious for announcements here. Just a quick reminder that you guys can support the show via Patreon if you feel inclined to do so. Patreon.com/Iron Sysadmin. Otherwise, I don't know what else we got. Oh, we got DEF CON meetup is coming up next week, right? DEF CON 610.
Yep. So BloomCon is Saturday. Actually, I think might be Friday, Saturday, Sunday. There's some BloomCon going on this weekend at Bloomsburg University. The DC 610 meetup is next Wednesday. And for those of you,
go ahead.
Sorry, for those of you who went to the Whopper Summit, the planning for the next Whopper Summit has already started. So we're working on making it bigger and better and badder for next year.
Cool. The Lehigh Valley AWS users group is also meeting the week after next. So what's the date here? So the 3rd is DEF CON 610. The 10th should be the Lehigh Valley AWS users group meetup that my coworker runs. So,
did you make it to the first one?
I made it to the first one. I haven't made it to. So he does that on the same night that we do the podcast. So I don't know. Plus 2 meetups in a month is tougher to get past the family. So,
well, how was the first one though?
It wasn't bad. He had a pretty good turnout. The one of the guys who runs the Red Hat Accelerators group that I'm a member of, he lives nearby, and he made it out, so that was fun. Not in an official Red Hat capacity, but just he came out to sort of help, answer questions and whatnot about. He's a TAM for Red Hat. He does actually work for Red Hat, so. To sort of throw in the Red Hat flair on AWS. And I think he made it to the second one as well. So he may be a regular coming out to that. I invited him to DEF CON 610 too, but he didn't make it last month. But maybe he will in the future. I don't know.
Cool.
So yeah, it wasn't bad. There wasn't a whole lot in the way of like content or whatever at the first meetup. It was more or less like, hey, we've got a meetup. Let's meet some people. Let's figure out where we want this to go. And I think he did a pretty good job of trying to organize that and get some feedback as to what the people who made it there want to see out of the meetup. So where it's going to go from there, I don't know. Maybe we could, after he's established and whatnot, maybe we'll have him come on the show one night and he can talk about it a little bit. Just to sort of spread the news. If anybody's interested. Yeah. All right, so we'll try to get, I guess we can get a link for BloomCon, a link for both the meetups that we talked about, and we'll add them to the show notes then before I publish them. So anybody can look those up if they want to. All right, in the way of reviews, we got one guy hit us up on Twitter. He also gave us a suggestion for something to chat about, which is what we'll be chatting about tonight. His name published on Twitter is Rob Weaver. He appears to be European in descent just based on the way he talks. So anyway, he says, great show this week regarding change control. Gave him lots of ideas. Says, keep up the good work. And he listens to us chaps, is what I meant by the, maybe I'm stereotyping, on Podkicker, which I've never heard of, but it's apparently an app for Android, which he's able to listen to us on, which is awesome because I never registered us with Podkicker, so they must consume one of the other services we publish through. So that's cool. Thank you, Rob, for the feedback, and it's very, very helpful. All right.
I'm surprised you haven't heard of it. Let's see, Podkicker is one of the most popular podcast managers for Android.
Yeah, which is exactly what everyone says about their podcast manager app.
It says it right in their description.
Right in their own description. Yeah,
it seems pretty legit.
I was a Beyond Pod user when I was on Android, which I do miss. I liked that app, but I think they made the same claim. One of the best or one of the most popular is a pretty broad thing.
I use Podcast Republic. Let me see what they say. Just a minute here.
These guys have just short of 8,500 reviews. So you know.
Oh, good. Good.
Where's the description?
I don't know.
Charles.
I ended up on the Google Play Store because this is
Yeah.
as close to Google device as I get, and it burned a lot, so I closed them.
It is a top quality podcast app on Android.
Top quality. Top quality.
And they have like they had a bunch of reviews. They have 73,000 reviews.
73,000? That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now I have to look up Beyond Pod. Rated 4 stars. Awesome.
I don't know.
Weird.
It downloads my podcast and I listen to them.
You closed the wrong tab again, didn't you, Jason?
No, I wasn't even in Safari.
Hey man, computering is hard.
It is hard.
He at least knows which country Tel Aviv is in, so he's got that going. He's got that going for him.
Yeah, it's in South Africa, right?
It's in Ireland. I'm telling you.
It's in Ireland. Yeah, Tel Aviv, Iowa.
Iowa. It's in Iowa.
I just realized Iron Sysadmin also starts with I. Are you confused about where this podcast is based?
Yeah, totally. Where are we at?
Indianapolis.
Indianapolis. Now
Indianapolis.
we're moving from countries to states to cities. Indianapolis is a city, right?
See, Iron Sysadmin starts with an I, so it's an Apple product.
Oh, right. Totally.
Ooh.
Except that it's not. But you can find it on iTunes.
Ah.
So, anyway. All right. You guys got anything cool going on you want to chat about? Any neat projects? Any fun things to chat about?
Yeah, so apparently Rob is in our YouTube thing right now. He says he's from
awesome.
Wales.
Wales.
Wales in the UK.
See? Good.
Hi, Rob.
He's been using Podkicker for years. Thank you.
You just have to keep your eye on the 32 different ways that people can contact us.
Yeah, right. Is there anybody in the Slack? How about Twitter? Let me check Twitter. Anyway. So I don't have anything terribly interesting going on, except that I've been hammering my head off the wall trying to configure a Cisco ASA to use at home. It's been apparently it's been too long since I had to manage a Cisco firewall, and it's not coming back to me quickly.
Why?
So I was able to
one of those. I have it. I'm just going to use it.
Well, no. Okay. So currently, I don't have. Right. So yes, I have it. I'm going to use it. I don't have like a standard router anymore. I have a Google Wi-Fi adapter, which I'm currently using as my router, right? Which I don't love. I don't love having that connected directly to the internet. I'd rather have it protected by something else that is meant to firewall, right? I had the ASA sitting here. I figure, what the hell? I'll use it.
That works.
Sure. Okay. The fact that you had to ask me that makes me think that you don't agree with that.
It seems a little heavy for.
It is heavy.
Home.
It is.
Back when you were hosting things there, it was different, but
yeah. Well, that's why I had it, but I never put it into production. So now that I'm not like running services out of my house anymore, I figured I have all the availability in the world to take things up and down, so I can fiddle with this thing. So I decided that I would. So I got it set up so that I can get from, like I have my wireless connected to one port and I have my wired stuff connected to another, and I have like a home lab connected to another port. I've got that mostly working. The thing that I can't for the life of me get to work is, so I have a Plex server, and in order for that to work properly, I have to forward an inbound port. Yeah. And I cannot get the stupid ASA to do an inbound NAT forward, port forward. It's frustrating.
Every piece of crap residential router can do this.
Yes, That's my point.
The ASA can definitely do it. You just
yeah.
need to know the black magic commands to put in.
The ASA can.
Yeah, I might have a nickel in my pocket here, so you can get a real router.
It is a real firewall, and that's the problem. It's a real firewall with real complicated configuration.
Here, I found 11 cents on. I found 11 cents on the ground today when I was walking to and from work. You can have it. Get a better router.
I could probably just go buy like a Linksys for 11 cents, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I bristle a little because you have the firewall connected directly to the interwebs, which hurts me a lot. So,
well, what else would you connect directly to the world?
I always have a router in front of things.
Well,
that's all.
So you complained that my ASA was a little heavy. Now you want me to put a router in front of it?
No, I don't. I actually honestly was surprised you didn't throw like what was that crazy Linux distro you were using that terminated VPN?
I could do that. The thing I'm trying to do is sort of I don't know, embedify my devices such that I'm not depending on a VM or a full-on computer, a full-on tower or whatever to get me to the internet. What I want is just a device that is meant to do a thing, like a router or like a firewall, that is just like, that's its job, that's what it does, right?
That makes sense.
So that's what I'm trying to do. Yes, I could go back to, so what I used to have was the Cisco router, the ancient Cisco router, and then I had a small hypervisor behind it, which I then ran a VM, which was my router, right? And this is all very complicated and very easy to fail, and it's not something that if in the middle of the day something stops working and I'm at work and my wife calls me to say, why is the internet down? I can't just say, okay, go downstairs and unplug the white flashing box. That didn't work. Unplug the green flashing box. Right? So anyway, that's kind of my goal at the moment. So
our long lost co-host may be able to help you. He's more up to date with the current ASA stuff.
Oh, good. I have a friend who lives just across town who actually gave me the ASA. He offered to come help me, but we just haven't been able to find a time for him to come over and help me out. So why are you chuckling? Because he gave me the ASA because he didn't want it? Is that what it is? Okay. Maybe. Sorry, I saw Charles chuckling. I thought he was chuckling at me.
I was chuckling at you.
Okay.
Anyway,
Anyway,
I didn't give you the ASA.
No, you didn't. So maybe it will turn out that the right answer is to just go buy Walmart special home router and do that, or maybe I've got a coworker who's running a pfSense embedded device. That might be a good in between, right? All the configurability of a pfSense box, which is unfortunately BSD based. I hate BSD.
So I this is going to sound really odd coming from me, but the Netgear Orbi is absolutely amazing and works really well. So
yeah,
your wireless and everything.
That's sort of what I have with the Google Wi-Fi. It's a mesh network. It's got a built-in router. It expects to be connected directly to the internet. I just feel like that's not the right way to do it. And maybe I should just not think that. Maybe it's perfectly fine to have it directly connected to the internet. That's the kind of device that I would normally have something in between it and the internet to protect it from the world. Because it's like a common platform for people to attack. Right? Maybe I'm just being too paranoid.
I'm not sure I know what device you're talking about. Is this basically equivalent to a Linksys Wi-Fi device?
Yeah. It's a competitor to the thing you just listed, the Orbi or whatever you called it.
Oh, just connect it directly to the internet. It's fine. It's designed to be connected to the internet.
Yeah, maybe I'll just leave it that way. I don't know. But I still have a need for like
keep it up to date.
Well, yeah, it updates automatically. That's one of the reasons I like it. I still have a need to connect my home lab, which I could probably do behind that because it has a single Ethernet port as well, as there's no integrated hub or anything or integrated switch. But I can certainly connect that to a switch, which is exactly what I have in place right now. So, yeah. Anyway. That's my current project. Home networking.
What am I working on? Just updated my GitLab instance. I now have a Enterprise Ultimate Edition because I host a open source project there, so they give free licenses for that sort of stuff.
Cool.
Which is cool. So I've got all sorts of new fun toys to play with. Still working on the shelves. Just waiting for the heat has to go up a little bit before I can just start doing any of the painting.
You keep saying that.
But
we have
like
warm days. I think you're just putting it off.
what do you define as warm? Because warm day so far has been like low 50s at most.
That's warm enough to do what you're talking about.
Well, the garage.
You might want more than a day though.
Yeah, so the paint and stuff is supposed to be like 60 degrees or more in order to put the stuff on. So I've started doing the sanding, but that's about it. And I built another little shelf that doesn't require as much tender, loving care as this one does for the bar, so I can put bottles up on it. So that'll be done tomorrow.
Cool. Charles, anything fun going on? Any more cool train stuff? You recently had a vacation, which was cool, right?
I did have a vacation, and I racked up another 2,000 miles by train, so I'm feeling pretty good about that.
Wow. 2,000 miles.
Picked up a little new mileage in the Chicago area, so that's cool.
Cool. Do you have like a map where you've traced all of the tracks you've touched?
I did back in some previous iteration of Google's custom mapping service. I don't know what the hell has happened to it at this point.
Okay.
What I do have is a spreadsheet, so if I ever wanted to make a map, I could very easily construct where I've been in the States anyway since 2008.
Cool.
Google probably canceled it.
Yeah, right. They retired that. Nobody needs maps.
Google killed more services than Thanos.
There's a there's a site for that. Was it killedbygoogle.com or something?
Yeah, it's got a bunch of stuff I vaguely remember.
Yeah. I'll have to check it out.
Some of which I miss.
I'll have to check it out sometime when we're not recording a live podcast. Or, just rabbit trail down into some other weird thing that, Iron Sysadmin's never known for that.
Hey, we should get Danny on.
Oh, God. I mean, we could have Danny, but we'll have to warn all the listeners first so that they can just not tune in that night. Or tune in because it was awesome. There's
Tonight, Iron Sysadmin features Army Creole. What?
Okay, so that's that. I suppose we can move on into the main topic. What do you think?
Kind of forgot we had one, but sure, let's do that.
We do indeed. Remember, we were aiming for an hour. We hit an hour. So if we can finish the main topic in half an hour, we'll hit the number we were actually shooting for. Here we go. Okay, so tonight's main topic comes from the same chap who had given us a review on Twitter, or at least some feedback on Twitter. Rob, he asks via Twitter, IT automation may be a good talk, Ansible, Puppet, and such. What you guys have worked with and experience. So, yeah, I've dealt with a little bit of automation. Primarily Puppet, but I've also done build automation. So I figured what we would do is not just cover a single config management platform or a couple config management platforms, but touch on build automation, config management, and then app deployment, because we have some expertise in all three of those areas right here on the show right now. So quite some time ago, when Red Hat released Satellite version 6, I put a bunch of effort into figuring out how to automate my builds for my RHEL infrastructure. using Pixie Boot and Kickstart and eventually Puppet. And that has been such a nice thing to have. Charles, you can probably speak to this, being my primary VM customer. That it VM builds and even physical builds, even though that doesn't affect you as much, but it affects me. They went from a thing that took me a couple hours, to physically build a machine or copy a machine from a template and then get it configured. Mind you, we were coming from a no config, no automation scenario into a Kickstart and Pixie and Puppet. So we deployed all of those things at the same time. And that improved things so much. It went from several hours to build a VM to a couple minutes of, defining the system in this case, satellite, and then turning the VM on and letting it boot and letting it, just basically configure itself. And then that went a step further because we're also using Red Hat's Red Hat virtualization. There's an API that Satellite can tie into, so I can literally log into Satellite, define my VM, how much memory it should have, CPUs, disk space, what host group it should live in, which tells it what Puppet classes to apply to it, and then it makes it in Rev, it boots it up, and it basically from start to finish, at the end of it, I have a VM that all I have to do is move it into the network that it's going to live in and make sure it has the accounts it needs on it so people can log in. So that's been a great help. Charles, I don't know if you can remember the days before we had that. I know you really came to the college around the time that I was working on or finishing that.
Oh no, the first I certainly remember the first couple of VM builds where you'd hand off the build, which had taken a while, and then I had a whole checklist that I went through of things I had to manually configure before it was really ready for us to use. I mean, I still have a checklist, but at this point, it's mostly just making sure that Puppet actually ran correctly and applied the classes that we expected it to apply, and that the network contexts are sane. I mean, the actual QA process, and just a few things we can't automate. The actual QA process takes 15, 20 minutes tops, and a lot of it's just gut checking, looking around, doing sudo for the first time. It's
right. And
I'm not expecting to find broken stuff at this point.
Right. One of the great things that this has given us is the ability to repeat a build. Right. So, Charles and I have worked together to define what a web server that runs PHP it should look like. Right. All the things that don't change from machine to machine, and they've all been defined within the build environment and within Puppet, so that I can churn out a dozen of these things, and they'll all look pretty much the same on the other end. And that's been actually a really big. Well, it's been a great tool to have handy. Jason, I know you've at least when we last worked together, you were more on the network side, and you were more of a consumer of systems that I handed off, similar to how Charles is. But I know in future roles or roles after that, you did work as a sysadmin, or what was your title? Riot Control Systems Engineer? Is that what that was called?
Riot Control Systems Commander.
Systems Commander. And you were running on AWS, right?
Yep.
Did you also manage physical hardware at one point? I thought you had a lights out data in it.
I did. Yeah, I did manage physical hardware at one point that I never saw. So that was all done through lights out to boot machines and get them running. And then we used Catello, Foreman and Catello to manage them.
So you were pretty much doing basically the same thing I am with Satellite. Catello,
basically.
Catello and Foreman are upstream of Satellite. Yep. So when you went to AWS, how did you build machines there? Did you leverage any of the like imaging and templating and whatnot that you can use on AWS?
So initially, so we did we literally moved to AWS overnight. So it was like a 24-hour move.
Lift and shift, they call that now.
Yep. I call it and we're not going to say that. So it was a cluster. And it was
cloud.
the first foray. Yeah, it's cloud. Sort of the first foray into AWS. So we did everything wrong. So I managed it the exact same way. We stood up a Catello box and booted up EC2 instances, dropped a basic image on them, and then let Puppet manage to configure everything for us.
So you weren't necessarily doing cloud native stuff. You were just basically doing what you did in the data center, except now you were doing it on AWS.
Right, initially, and then further on, we started moving into using CloudFormation templates,
Right.
and we were starting to look at building golden images to. So, in the cloud native world, you build a single golden image that you use to boot off of.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really look like most people use any sort of Ansible, Puppet, Chef, whatever. They just believe that the golden image remains golden after they deploy it. I don't see a lot of that. There's a lot of monitoring that goes on, but nothing that I've seen so far that is OS level where it's looking at ensuring that configs remain the same.
When you get to the cloud, I feel like there's a different mindset, and the mindset is that your system is now disposable. And instead of making sure that the config doesn't drift, you just design it in such a way that you can just nuke it and rebuild it in seconds.
Correct.
To the proper spec, right?
Right, and that's sort of what the CloudFormation templates do.
Right, and that's what that golden image is all about, which, by the way, is another way, whether you're in the cloud or not, it's another way to speed up your build automation. I never got there myself because kickstarting is fast enough for me, but for on-prem or for cloud, you can certainly build a template or an image and base your VMs on that. Or in some cases, like in the case of OpenStack, you can even base, I believe, physical hardware on images, where it literally writes that image to disk when you pixie boot a machine. And that gives you the same sort of disposability between hardware and VMs. So that's another way to make your builds faster and more repeatable. And in fact, it is the suggested way to do it when you're in a cloud environment. You know, you shouldn't be fiddling with the operating system after it's built. It should be baked into your image once you've decided on what your image should look like.
Right, and that would be if you're dealing with VMs in the cloud. The shiny new way to do it is to use containers. So you can do the same basic thing with CloudFormation templates and auto-scaling groups and, you know, all the other AWS buzzwords. And you put all that together and use containers instead. And that way, the spin-up time is significantly faster than dealing with booting off of a golden image.
Right. There was something I want to put in there, but I can't remember now. Anyway, oh, right. You were talking about containers being the new hotness, and this space is moving so quickly that not just containers is the new hotness, but literal like AWS native applications that leverage all of the various software as a service tools like Lambda and whatever are really quickly becoming the new standard when you're cloudizing your applications. The downside of that is pre-built applications don't really run that way, right? So I can't take WordPress and run it in Lambda. That's got to run on a LAMP stack, essentially, which is great for containers. But if you're writing software, the way that they want you to do it nowadays is you should write it in, cloud native functions like Lambda, which really throws a wrench in things.
Well, so realize that you have to keep in mind Lambdas are, I'd almost say that they're reactive. They have to be called, and they can only run for a certain period of time. So it's not like you can run some sort of a long-running process in a Lambda. Lambdas are intended to be, API endpoints to do something.
Right. So the way it was described to me is you have a very, very simple templated web application, which doesn't have any logic in it. And it just calls Lambda functions for every bit of logic that it runs.
Right. Right. And as long as whatever function you're calling can complete in a reasonable amount of time, you know,
Yeah.
a couple seconds at the most,
And most web
even if it has to spawn other ones.
Yeah, most web applications are designed to work. You know, when you render a page, it's just like while the page is loading, ta-da, there you go.
Right. And then you fall into the mindset that a lot of people forget, in that you know, not everything is a website. So
Exactly. So we're pretty quickly moving past build automation and moving into cloud, and I want to kind of get us back on track. So the next the next sort of level of life cycle is config management. Obviously, that's not relevant when you're talking about software as a service or Lambda, or even containers to any real extent. Config management is more of a tool used on full-on heavy VMs. It's funny that I'm calling VMs heavy nowadays. But personally, I use Puppet, and I have some experience with Ansible. I've only recently started using Ansible to do things. The way I still see Ansible as a different tool than Puppet. Puppet enforces state, and Ansible carries out tasks, right? So
yes.
I've long hoped that I could replace Puppet with Ansible, and the more I use Ansible, the more I think that that's not really the state that I'm going to end up in. I think Puppet is going to have certain tasks that will remain in Puppet. Things like config management, things like maintaining state. And Ansible will be used for one-off tasks or for things that have to happen amongst the entire fleet. And that's, I think, I just picture that as where it's going. Now, I haven't used Ansible Tower yet. I don't know if anybody, I don't know if Jason, if you have. I know, Charles, you probably haven't. You might not even know what Ansible Tower is.
I've heard of it.
But Ansible Tower is basically it's like Foreman for Ansible.
Right. It's like akin to a Puppet Master.
Although my understanding is that, and you should know more about this since you're plugged into Red Hat. My understanding is that Satellite and subsequently Foreman is supposed to get Ansible support.
The last I heard was with Satellite 6.4. I'm on 6.3, so I don't know yet. I have been meaning to. So basically, I'm in the midst of a 6.3 upgrade. It's almost done. Then I'm gonna start researching 6.4 and get us to 6.4. So once I do that, if I find out that Ansible is better integrated, I will report back. But yeah, the last time I asked somebody at Red Hat about it, which was like a year and a half ago at this point, 6.2 was the latest release. 6.3 was like coming out soon. And they're like, 6.3 will have some Ansible support. 6.4 should have full integration with Ansible. I don't know if it panned out or not. So, yeah. Excuse me. So, Puppet, we got into the Puppet game a little bit late. We use Puppet 3 because that's what Red Hat was supporting at the time on Satellite. Part of my 6.3 upgrade is to get us to Puppet 4. And then the 6.4 upgrade will get us to Puppet 5. So there's going to be a quick succession of, Puppet upgrades in the middle there. But so most of my experience currently is with Puppet 3, which I don't know that it really changes between 4 and 5. So Puppet, there was a bit of a learning curve. It's a simple enough language, but there is definitely, it's very Ruby-esque because Puppet is written in Ruby. And that, in my opinion, is one of Puppet's downfalls. The fact that it requires an agent, it requires Ruby to run that agent because the agent is all written in Ruby. And it's in our experience, has given us one major problem. And that problem is that when your config management tool is managing your system, there's nothing to manage the config management agent. Like, the Puppet agent can't make sure the Puppet agent is running because the Puppet agent can't check itself when it dies.
Right. So
that's what monitoring is for.
Well, yeah, and monitoring in this case is we have the syslogs in Splunk, and I've got a report that's based. It's some convoluted logic of transactions, but it's like, hey, Splunk, so has it been at least 12 hours since a catalog run finished on a particular system? If so, let us know about it in the morning so we go look at it to see if Puppet's broken.
Yeah. So I know, Jason, you're probably like, why don't you just monitor for the process? Well, in this case, it's not that the process has died; it's that it's hung, and that's happened to us entirely too frequently. And I don't know if it's a Puppet 3 problem. I don't know if it's a problem the way we're using Puppet. I don't know if it's a problem with how often we have it running, or if it's a problem with satellite. Like, there's all kinds of variables here.
You guys are on Puppet 3 still?
Yes. Did
sorry.
you miss all that?
I guess I missed what version of Puppet you're on. So just as a point, Puppet's not written in Ruby anymore.
Oh, have they moved to something else? What is it now?
Yeah, so from 4.0 on, they rewrote it in C++ and Clojure.
Clojure. So yeah, as I mentioned just 5 minutes ago, we're on Puppet 3 because Satellite 6.2 runs Puppet 3. So 6.3 brings Puppet 4, and 6.4 brings Puppet 5. So we'll be moving as we move.
That's where I'm confused, because I ran Catello and I've had Puppet 4 for a long time.
Right.
So
right.
That's it. Just I must have missed that part.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, a satellite upgrade is always kind of a huge undertaking because of the build automation. Every time I do a satellite upgrade, my build automation breaks, and then I have to spend time fixing it. So I usually wait until I know I'm going to have time to fix it, which is few and far between in the role that I play at the college. So, so yeah, I've been working on getting us to 6.3. I've already worked through fixing my build environment. 6.4 will come. So basically, I'm as far as getting to the point where satellite is up to date. Now I need to get us to Puppet 4, which is the next thing on my to-do list. And I haven't even looked at what the migration or upgrade looks like yet. So anyway, the reason I said there's in my mind, a big difference between Puppet and Ansible. Ansible is like an entirely different tool. Obviously, it's an entirely different tool. It's an entirely different architecture, right? So Puppet has an agent that checks in with the master every so often. It says, what config should I enforce? And it enforces it, right? If the agent dies, then it's not checking in anymore. If the agent hangs, it's not checking in anymore. Ansible is the opposite. Ansible is a push instead of a pull. So Puppet is more pull. It checks in, it pulls down config. Ansible will use Python and SSH, which, find me a Linux box that doesn't use Python anyway. So that's good. It means that all the libraries that you need are either there or available already. And it's cross-platform for the client. So I run Ansible, the client, from my MacBook without a problem. But it's push, right? So you define a task in Ansible, and then you say, okay, Ansible, run this task, or okay, Ansible, run this playbook. And it SSHs into all the machines that you're trying to, set this state on or make this config change on, does the change using, something like a very advanced expect script, from what I can tell, interacts with Python and whatnot to make all that stuff happen. And then it gives you a nice report at the end as to which ones it worked on, which ones it succeeded on, which ones it failed on, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I've only got a little bit of experience with Ansible at this point. I used it as part of my satellite upgrade because the satellite tools package had to get upgraded on all of my machines. So I got a list of hosts together and I wrote up an Ansible playbook to make that happen, which was, it was a great introduction to dealing with Ansible, and it was really helpful. It got everything done for me. So, Jason, did you work with Ansible at all? I think you said you were.
Yeah, I was working with Ansible a bit. I think I prefer. So it's a different security model. So with Puppet, right, you have the agent that runs on the server or on the clients and has to check in with the server, which means that all the clients have to be able to get to the server wherever it is.
Right.
And Ansible flips that on its head, where the server connects to the clients. And I prefer that model only because in my world, protecting that config management server is one of the most important tasks out there. And so for it to be able to get to all the servers is not a big deal. Right. Versus, where my edge servers that are running, my Nginx proxies have access to be able to call all the way back to my config management server so that Puppet can check in. I'm not a huge fan of that.
Right. But so in an environment where, so in our case, our Nginx proxies are configured via Puppet. So
Right.
in that environment, either I'd have to rewrite all of that in Ansible and then have something that would run periodically to make sure it's enforced on the Nginx proxies, or I have to stick with Puppet. Like, I don't know if there's an in-between there.
Right. Right. I mean, I imagine there's a way to do Puppet proxies and secure things a little bit differently.
Yeah.
It's probably there. I
So
haven't dug into it.
in the case of Catello and Foreman and Satellite, there's a thing called a Foreman proxy or a satellite capsule that are essentially that. You can put these systems that are they're able to check in with your master, and they're also able to host Puppet, right? So then you can have it like, say, in a remote office or in a secondary location or in a protected network, whatever your use case is. And then your machines check that, and then that checks your satellite or that checks your Foreman master. So yeah, that could be a way to handle that sort of thing. They're essentially like satellite Puppet masters, right?
You could use Ansible to push your Puppet config to the local machine and then let Puppet configure it from there.
Use Ansible to push your wow. Good idea. Good idea.
Yeah, that way Puppet runs constantly and keeps the state, and Ansible is the one that's you've got the security of outward higher security level to lower security level.
Right. So I don't know. We could talk all night about Ansible and Puppet, I suppose, but we can also move on to app deployment, which is really Charles's thing. I see him light up and come over closer to them. Yay! It's my turn to talk.
And I feel like I've talked about app deployment a couple of times, particularly, first time when I just came on as a guest to talk about how we managed WordPress.
Yeah, right.
And there's a lot I could say about that. So we're primarily using Capistrano for app deployment in conjunction with GitLab CI for actual deployment. There's a couple things going on there. And we might be moving off of Capistrano to something very similar called Deployer, which is basically Capistrano but implemented in PHP. There's reasons for that. But
if you have PHP anyway, right?
It's not even because of that. It's mainly because there's a feature that's implemented. Well, part of it is a feature that's implemented that we want that's in Deployer, but not Capistrano. And also, Capistrano is written in Ruby, and we are not Ruby developers.
Right.
That's just not what the shop's expertise is. But with Capistrano, we're able to define what the deployed state of the application looks like within limits. So we can say it's on these servers, it's deployed to this place. These are where the config files are. But the thing is, we can't manage the state of the config files, which is kind of a limitation. And I'd had some ideas that Puppet might have been able to help with that. Like, with WordPress, when you have a WP config file, there's a lot of crap in there. Database credentials, salts, nonces, application password, application configuration, which should be consistent across all the different nodes that we deploy to, but we're still managing it by hand, which is not great. We played with that a little bit with our MediaWiki deployments by putting essentially all the config that wasn't privileged in some way. We actually started managing in version control, and then there's just a secrets file that's still managed on bare metal, but it's a lot smaller. Just anything that shouldn't be in Git.
Right.
And that worked out. That's been working out fairly well. The CI piece is just having GitLab run because Capistrano, you can run that deployment from your local environment. It's very much like Ansible in that regard,
right?
Because it's just kicking off a bunch of SSH commands in parallel. having GitLab run those deployments instead takes your local machine out of the equation as a single point of failure and gives you a repeatable deployment. With tests and QA and all that good stuff, and everybody can see, all right, here's the deployment, here's where we did a build, here's where we validated the build, here's where we deployed the build, rinse, wash, and repeat constantly. Not that we're actually pushing constantly because we're not that kind of shop, but we could.
Right. All right. So automating app deployment, I mean, really, it gives you the same sort of benefits that automating builds and config management get you, which is repeatability, right?
Yeah, repeatability and being able to state with a very high degree of confidence, this is the code that's deployed.
Right.
We pushed this commit. This is what the build looked like. Here's the artifact. And this is what's actually out on the server. And if for some reason, somehow it got damaged or corrupted, we will just rerun the deployment and everything goes back to the way it's supposed to be.
That's handy. That's handy. And I've heard stories at least of shops that are fully DevOpsified that their entire stack can be deployed in a similar way where, everything can be redeployed easily, quickly, and you can always get it back to a known state by simply clicking a few buttons or, initiating a rebuild or whatever.
Yeah.
Which is really a lot of what we talked about tonight is sort of, either part of that or earlier versions of that, right? So I don't have all of my stuff containerized, for example, but if I did, you could easily rebuild an application by redeploying its container, right? I don't have everything that we don't have every single little thing that we have to touch puppetized, but we could. And if we did, then your app deployment could turn into an even more automatable procedure, right? So just what you were talking about with that WP config file, right? Or even just the config of Apache, right? You're still doing that by hand, as I remember correctly, right? Or you have that automated somehow now?
No, it's well documented. Yeah, it's one of those things where the Apache config could absolutely at this point, well, there's also really no reason for us to be running Apache at this point, but that's a different matter.
Right.
But it could absolutely be automated at this point. It's just one of those things where we're still using VMs. We don't build new VMs particularly often. So it's like there's the XKCD rules in effect. There's no reason for us to automate it. It's not worth the effort. We don't change it very often. Now, when we went through that process a couple of years ago, when we updated and improved all the ciphers, that's a time when I would have really loved to have had that automated because of what a pain in the ass that was. But that's come, that's gone, and that part is managed by Puppet at this point, so it doesn't matter.
Right. So that is the sort of thing where we could be periodically tweaking what ciphers we offer, just because that is a changing landscape, right? That's a perfect example of something that should be in config management. Just earlier this week, I had to reconfigure all of our fleet to relay through a system other than our on-premise email system because we're in the process of, we've already switched to Gmail, right? So our on-prem email solution is going to go away. I can't have servers relaying through it anymore. So I configured all that with Puppet. And I was able to deploy that to, 100 or 100.5 systems in, 2 hours, right? So that's not nothing, right? Like that's valuable. That is very valuable. I can remember the days where I would be logging into 200 systems manually to make that change. And sure, I'd probably have worked up some sort of copy paste shell script or something that I could log into a system, right click, paste, make sure that it worked, log out, log into the next system. But that's nowhere near just, I defined a Puppet class. I assigned it to all of my production servers. I waited an hour and Puppet did its thing and deployed it. Right? So this really gets you to a state, if you can automate all of it, it gets you to a state where your infrastructure becomes replaceable. easily replaceable. When we built our Nginx proxies, I made it a point to put every single thing that I had to touch in a Puppet class. You know, when we built it in our test environment, I did stuff manually. And as I did it manually, I learned how to do it in Puppet. And then when I built our production environment, I kickstarted a server, I assigned the Puppet classes to it, and it built me some Nginx servers. I didn't touch a single thing by hand on that, except private data like the SSL key files. And that means that if something horrible were to befall one of our Nginx servers, I can kick out a new one, apply the Puppet classes to it, and there it is, done. Right? Mm-hmm. So that's powerful. That's a really handy thing to have. And there's still more we can do. We can do a lot more to further automate our build, config, and application deployment. But to your point, what's it worth? Right.
And I think that's a very important consideration. Like all the automation that we've built to this point, we didn't do it just because it was cool or because it would be fun. I mean, certainly it was cool and it was fun, but we built it useful. We built it to solve a very specific problem. You know, it came out of the we had a continuous integration research project, and some of the stuff we implemented because there was no reasonable way to have a multi-node environment if we didn't have this capability. We couldn't be. We needed a way to do parallel builds and to do repeatable builds if we were going to have this kind of capability. So we had to have it.
I mean,
like, it wasn't just because it was cool; it was essential.
You and I have been through, I think, 2 iterations now of the web platform.
You know, it's probably more like 3 if we're honest.
Three iterations technically. There was the iteration we were on when you and I started working on it, and then we went to the next iteration, which is where we standardized. You know, we made sure that things were built in a standard way, and that's when the build automation and Puppet and a few other things came into play. And then when we pretty quickly moved into the next, I guess there were 2 more iterations after this, because there was a whole new generation, and then there was like a tweak to that generation.
Yeah, right now we're on what I'm calling Gen 3.5.
Right. So we've essentially rebuilt our entire web infrastructure several times at this point. The first time was pretty painful because
we learned a lot.
Nothing was automated, nothing was standardized, and we put a lot of work into standardizing and automating as much as we could. When we got to Generation 3, it was okay. We're tweaking a few things. We're going from Rel 6 to 7. I think is what we did on Gen 3,
which was a pretty big deal because those are the web servers that are really managed by Puppet. So the neat thing is then with 3.5, what we're calling it, we're able to iterate in place. We can use Puppet to make pretty significant config changes that are relatively seamless. Where we might have previously had to kick out new servers and do a state migration, which admittedly would be faster now. It's like, nope, we're just upgrading and improving in place.
And not just that, but we went from single-headed web servers to multi-headed web servers. So we basically now build in triplicate every single web server that we would have previously built a single server for. And in that scenario, automation is key. Because to build 3 of the same thing, to run the same application, they got to be pretty damn close to perfect.
They have to match, and you don't want to have to be making a change manually in 3 places.
Right. Not just that, but it would literally take me a day to kick out 3 of the same web server for you if I was doing it manually. Because it's just, you know, a bunch of repetition of the same thing. And to have somebody with my experience and skill set sitting around building web servers all day is a complete waste of resource. Automating that just solves that problem. Not to speak too highly of myself, but you get the point. Anyone you're paying for their expertise, you don't want them sitting around doing menial repetitious tasks, right?
Besides that, they'd burn out pretty quick too.
They would burn out pretty quickly and move on to some place that has, you know, cooler and fancier stuff. All right, so I think that pretty much covers it. Did you have any final thoughts, either of you, that builds on this? No? I suppose not. All right, so then I think we may as well call it a night for tonight then. That was, I think, a pretty good discussion about automation and build and app deployment. We could certainly touch more deeply on things like cloud architectures and whatnot, but to be honest, I don't know that I have the expertise for that. We may move into that at some point, but maybe we could have
speculating. So no.
Yeah, maybe we could have somebody on the show who's more cloud native. I don't know. So yeah, that's that. I think we're gonna call it at that. So, folks, thank you for tuning in. Those of you who have watched us live, we got a pretty active chat tonight, which I think is where Jason has been for most of this conversation, going back and forth. That's handy. Maybe there's going to be a point where we're going to have somebody that just moderates our chat for us. Wouldn't that be an interesting step forward?
Let's make Dustin do it.
Let's make Dustin do it, but he's never shows up. Where's he tonight?
He's got a baby, and he doesn't sleep. And
tonight he didn't even say he wouldn't be. Maybe he's asleep.
I don't know. Probably busy.
Probably busy.
He's been hammered lately. So
no, believe me, I get it. I get it. We have 2 kids that are past the very bothersome newborn stage. So I've been through that twice, and I get it. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of stress on you. It's a lot of tired. So, yeah, I think, as I've said before, he gets a pass until his kid gets a little older. Although he's got to be almost a year by now, right? Or is he 2? No. Like a year?
No, 9 months, I believe.
Oh, really? Okay. Soon he'll be at the point where the kid is terrorizing him, but maybe sleeping through the night. At 9 months, is he still not sleeping through the night?
I believe he's it's hit or miss. I think he's teething now.
Yeah, that's no fun.
No, not really.
Our kids, I think. So our oldest, maybe it was partially due to our inexperience. Maybe it was partially her. I don't know. But we had lots of trouble getting her to sleep at night, and even that, she was sleeping through the night by 6 months. Our youngest, I mean, I think she was a month old. She's sleeping through the night. It scared us the first time she slept through the night. So like, aren't you supposed to wake up? Aren't you supposed to bother us in the middle of the night? What's up with this? Anyway. All right. So yeah, as I was saying, thank you folks for tuning in live. Thank you, those of you who are listening to us after the fact via your pod catching apps. If you would like to join our Slack team to give us feedback directly or chat with the hosts or whatever, you can go to ironsysadmin.com/Slack. If you want to watch us live on the 2nd and 4th Wednesdays of every month, roughly, unless we have more important things to do, you can go to YouTube. We have our own custom URL now, youtube.com/ironsysadmin podcast. You can hit the subscribe and that little notification bell. You'll know when we go live, because although tonight we went live almost on time, usually we're a little late. Iron Sysadmin Standard Time. Facebook and Twitter, you can find us, Iron Sysadmin. Just give us a search on Facebook or twitter.com/Iron Sysadmin. And as I mentioned before, if you would like to support the podcast monetarily, you can do so, patreon.com/Iron Sysadmin. And with that, I think I'm done talking for tonight. You guys have any final words?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at Xenophage. There's no Q in that.
There's no
and
Q.
on my blog at blog.godshell.com.
But is there a Z?
No.
There's no Z either, even though it sounds that way.
Yeah, it's magic.
All right. And Charles?
You can find me on Twitter at MACKENSEN, where I'm mostly talking about trains and football and occasionally web development and other matters.
Indeed. And you can find me on Twitter, even though I'm hit or miss as to how active I am on Twitter. Usually I'm just trolling Jason when I'm on Twitter.
Yep, that is.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening and have a good night.
Night all.
All right, good show, guys. thank you to those of you who tuned in live and in our very active chat. Looks like it's mostly Welsh lad. Actually, 2 folks named Rob. I don't know if Rob is still hanging around. The other Rob. So, yeah. Anyway, thanks for tuning in live, folks. We're going to call it a night for tonight, but feel free to join us next time we record, which should be 2 weeks from today. So, have a good one, everybody.